everyone, I'm Kyle Dyer, and welcome to Colorado Inside Out on this Friday, the 13th, January 13th, 2023. All this week, downtown Denver has been bustling with the start of a new legislative session. And with that, there are a lot of new faces. More than a third of the members are brand new to their jobs. In the House, half of the representatives are first-timers. And one person returning for his second term is Governor Polis, who was sworn in on Tuesday. To sort through what we might see materialize in the legislative session over the next, 115 days left, we have tonight Patty Calhoun, founder and editor of Westward, Scott Martinez, Denver attorney with Maritnez and Partners, Jessie Paul, political reporter and editor at Colorado Sun, and Luige Del Puerto, editor, Colorado Politics and Denver Gazette. Thank you all for coming. It's been such a busy week for you all, so thank you. Aside from all the new faces of legislators this week, Patty, there were some other new faces who made history at the state capitol this week.
Well, you see good behavior and you see very bad behavior. And we saw bad behavior, maybe inspired by the U.S. House and Lauren Boebert a few days before, when you had the opposition to Julie McCluskey, the new speaker, and just not behaving well. It was a bad start. But then yesterday, on Wednesday, you had the Ute Mountain Ute tribe and the Southern Utes, and they were there for the first time ever doing a joint address to the legislature. And you realized, first of all, what took the Colorado legislature so long. These were the original inhabitants of Colorado, and they brought up historic issues. They brought up some very recent issues like the sports betting issue that they had never been consulted, and that is a real slap and oversight. Back when Alec Garnett, now the chief of staff, pushed that. So let's hope we pay attention. There are a lot of issues that will affect the tribes in the coming session.
And listen, I think that the fact that they were here for us to listen was amazing. That was great. Scott, in the state Senate, the Dems have made clear their priority for this session, it being increasing affordable housing. We know it's a priority because it is Senate Bill number 1.
Yeah, so Senate Bill number 1 is not just the title, but it's a moniker that shows that is the priority for the state Senate. That particular bill sets aside $13 million to this Office of Public-Private Partnerships. And what it would do is it would allow the state to invest some money into some buildings that the state owns, some land that the state owns, and potentially turn that into some affordable housing options. What that Senate Bill 1 also signifies that the issue of affordable housing is high on people's minds. It's the number one issue for lots of folks. And you heard that when the governor was campaigning all across the state, talking about those pocketbook issues, and where he said people should be able to afford to live in the communities that they work. Teachers should be able to afford a house in their neighborhood school, which they happen to be teaching. And so I think you're going to see not just this bill, Senate Bill 1, but some additional bills. You've seen State Senate Dynamo Dominic Moreno allude to the fact that there may be some more affordable housing bills that are coming down the pike. What that is interesting to me is that it's going to pit some local control issues for cities and counties against the state legislature. So I think there's going to be a big battle coming out. I hope that they can find a way to work together to find some common ground and really create some affordable housing options for all Coloradans. Mm-hmm.
On the first day of the state legislature, State Representative Tracy Burnett resigned. She is the Boulder County Democrat who is facing criminal charges for allegedly lying about where she lives so that she could win re-election in a heavily Democratic district. So a vacancy committee has to name someone for her spot. And one well-known Colorado politician's name is already in there, Jesse.
Yeah, former Congressman David Skaggs is looking at running for the seat. He's announced his candidacy, and we also know that a Louisville town councilman is also going to run for it as well. But there's a lot of interesting things about this resignation and how it shapes the legislature. First of all, Tracy Burnett's resignation keeps women in the majority in the legislature. It's 50 to 49 right now. But if a man is selected, then all of a sudden you're going to have, the even split. So there was a lot of talk heading into the session about excitement about women for the first time having a majority in the legislature. And then these vacancy committees, they're really interesting. It's a few dozen people who get to select, the representatives for tens of thousands of people for several years. And this will be the 5th vacancy appointment in the legislature in a year-long span. So the legislature has been seated, but we still don't really know exactly what it's going to be looking like because of all these vacancy appointments.
Mm-hmm. A lot of ideas are going to be coming out in the weeks ahead, Luigi. A lot of affordability. We've also talked about this week some gun violence prevention programs, a lot of things, education that costs money. And we have a budget. And, we can't do everything. What are you looking at when you see how are they going to figure all this out when you crunch the numbers?
Well, and I always see the budget as the purest expression of the values of the state legislature. It sets the spending priorities. It tells us where they want to spend the money on. And we have pretty big problems that can be solved partly by spending, putting funds into homelessness, for example, housing, public safety, education. We still owe the schools a debt. An accounting gimmick that we did a couple years ago. And right now, what we're looking at is if we fund what we have right now, we're looking at about a $56 million deficit, which means, let me back up a bit. Now, the funny thing about budgeting is that $56 million deficit, it's a malleable amount. What I mean by that is it's art, it's politics. They can do certain things to kind of make it happen or not make it happen. Bottom line is that $56 million is a more solvable number than, let's say, 100 or 200 or 300 million bucks. But one note, that's probably why the governor was asked, hey, are you going to make permanent the 2-cent gas fee that we suspended last year? And his answer is no. And part of that is we do need the money. And there is a lot of spending priorities by this supermajority, at least in the House, a pretty dominant Democratic legislature.
It'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. Let's talk about the governor. He was sworn in for a second term on Tuesday, and Governor Polis said, for too many Coloradans, life is too hard and too expensive. I know we'll get more information on Tuesday at his State of the State, but Scott, affordability, not just for houses, but in so many aspects, are really, as you mentioned on the campaign trail, they're huge for him.
Yeah, as we think about that campaign trail, I think about that New York mayor's race where they were saying the rent is too damn high. That is where people are feeling pinch in their pocketbook, where the intersection of inflation and these insane housing prices are really causing a pinch on folks who are out there. And so when we look to the governor and ask for his leadership on some of these issues, the biggest hurdle still remains Tabor. And what Tabor is a cap on the amount of taxes that can be collected. And when there's a cap, we have a hard time solving problems that we know exist when we can't raise enough money to solve them. So when I look to the governor and say, is there something that you could do? The number one and biggest, thorniest issue is Tabor, and I hope that is going to be on the table for him and his administration as we go into these next 115 days.
Governor Polis wants more property tax relief as well in the hundreds of millions. If lawmakers say yes, Jessie, again, is that the best move for our state?
Well, let me talk about Tabor, too, because I think that's interesting. The legislature is looking, some Democrats want to get rid of the Tabor cap, the excess that we all got refunded, the $750 or $1,500 checks. Ask voters to do away with that, send them the money to education. So there are some conversations about that Tabor cap. But last night I was talking to the House Speaker, and she said, the requirement under Tabor that voters approve all tax increases, she thinks that's here to stay. So that's a pretty big indication of maybe where Democrats are at on that issue. On property taxes, the governor wants to spend an additional $200 million in property tax relief for this tax year, and then the 2024 tax year, bringing the total relief up to $900 million for those 2 years. They took some measures last year, but these are all kind of Band-Aid approaches over the past several years in response to the end of the Gallagher Amendment. I don't have enough time to explain that because it's very complicated, but this is all in lieu of a longer-term property tax fix in Colorado, and I think that you'll see a lot of talk at the legislature about that this year, but it remains really elusive. Nobody's provided a kind of concrete long-term solution, so we'll see what they come up with.
And just a really quick point on that, since you mentioned Tabor, I think there's a real tension here. On the one hand, people are saying, look, inflation is soaring. The governor said he's heard from people saying, look, affordability is a real problem. So here we have Tabor that puts money back into the pockets of people, on the one hand. And on the other hand, we have priorities from, by legislators. And they're saying, like, we could use that money, let's say, on, in this case, K-12 education. So there's a real tension here. And remember, it's a supermajority legislature, at least in the House side. It's a more, the Democrats are dominant. I see this as a more progressive legislature. So the governor, I think he's going to have his hands full.
Yeah, one might look from outside and be like, oh, everything's going to be fine for him. He is Democrat. It's going to be difficult, I think.
I think you're going to see sort of the more progressive wing of that caucus push for certain things. Now, in theory, and correct me if I'm wrong, I've only been here for about a year. It seems to me that the leadership in both chambers are more centrist, if you will. And so I think, their job, theoretical, would be try and kind of temper things, if you will. And of course, the governor, from what I've seen, is really good at like killing legislation before they reach his desk.
Patty, Governor Polis is also making national headlines for busing migrants to Chicago and New York. That has stopped. That stopped last weekend. But there's still writings nationally about what happened in Colorado, and we know more people will be coming here.
Well, and not just in Colorado, of course, and New York and Chicago have already been hit much harder, but it was ironic when this first came up in December, when people started noticing the migrants coming to Denver, that they were going, oh my God, it's just like the governors of Texas, and they're sending them here. The governor of Florida, the governor of Texas, they're putting them in Denver because we're so liberal. And as it turns out, no, the migrants were coming on their own. They had figured out ways to get here. What was also interesting is we learned that a lot of them, this wasn't their last stop. This was just a place they knew they could come while they were moving on. Some wanted to go to Chicago, some wanted to go to New York. The problem, I see that having Polis help them get there was a humanitarian move, but it was stupid not to talk to the mayors of New York, the mayor of Chicago. I mean, New York is just inundated. And the common courtesy of saying, we're going to send them there if you can handle it, or how can we help? That was a real boneheaded move by Polis, not to communicate. But I think he's also recognized it and made good.
Mm-hmm. This week, a computer outage at the Federal Aviation Administration caused an immediate grounding of all flights across the country. It's the talker of the week, leading to thousands of delays and cancellations and a huge headache once again. Even though the system is up and running, there's still things that need to be worked out. So Jessie, the system went down. It's what provides pilots with that pre-flight safety notices. Now everyone is questioning, do we have to overhaul this entire system?
Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about planes because I'm a big plane geek, so I appreciate that. Yeah, so these are the notice to air missions, and typically, they alert pilots to things like, closed runways or a light that's not working or something like that. So, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge system, but it's important for those pilots to get that information before they take off. It's a safety issue. But for me, what was interesting about this was it's just another reminder of how important Denver is in the national air system. We looked at what happened with Southwest Airlines when they shut down, and so much of the struggle or the cancellations, passed through Denver. It messed up the entire country. So I think this was another example when you saw planes getting backed up in Denver. It created problems everywhere else, and it's a good highlights really just how important Denver International Airport is to the national air infrastructure map.
Yeah, you could see on that morning they were saying that airports that were hardest hit, and Denver was both the hardest hit for cancellations and for delays. Now the current CEO of Denver International Airport, Phil Washington, is the one who was nominated by the president last year to take over the FAA. But nothing has happened. He's still in Denver. Luigi, this is interesting, and maybe there'll be a push now for something to happen, and if he's going to take over that position.
Well, they need somebody over there, and they kind of need somebody over there, like, quickly. All of these things that have happened in the last couple of weeks, Southwest meltdown, flight cancellations, they all are a grave reminder to us all how important it is that systems have to be working. And without leadership at the top directing and ensuring that systems need to be working, it becomes really difficult. There is no doubt that the systems that Southwest was using, for example, is pretty archaic. I think we've heard from the pilots, we've heard from all folks, and this now going down is another stark reminder of the need to keep those systems running and, if necessary, replace them. Also, just a reminder, you're a plane geek, just how dependent we are on planes. I think somebody told me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the next biggest major city outside of Colorado is like 7 hours away from Denver. So you either have to drive really long or you take the flight. And of course, planes are just so convenient if they're working.
If they're working. Patty, Senator Hickenlooper was the one who's saying, come on, senators, let's look at this nomination. Let's get things moving for Phil Washington.
Well, and it's tricky for Phil Washington because he's relatively new to aviation. You know, he was running buses and he got in trouble in LA. There's this whole little issue about a subpoena and an investigation, and that was one of the reasons it was stalled, his confirmation hearing on this position. Everyone says there's really nothing there. Hancock has come out and said we considered it when we were hiring him, bringing him back to DIA. So I think probably he would survive and he would get this job. They've got to put someone in this job soon. But Biden also might not want to take a hit on it. So we'll see. But we don't actually have evidence yet that Washington would be the solution, but he would at least fill the job.
He would fill the job. And it's interesting, Scott, the FAA's budget is under consideration this year. The Senate has to decide on this budget. It hasn't been done since 2018. And now I'm sure they're thinking, oh, we need to put a lot more in this budget, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, so right now the FAA is certainly in the spotlight in the Senate, nationally. And I think Luigi's right when we're talking about why it's important. We need this important critical system to work. When I think about this and look at the past of the FAA, I think about Alfred Kahn, who was the person who deregulated the airlines back in the 70s. He was an economics professor. He was not an aviation guy. He wrote the economics of regulation, and he was there to implement a system that needed to get things working just like we do today. And so if we take a blueprint from the 1970s and say, what's the type of person we need in this role? We need a person like Phil Washington, a person who's great on process improvement, somebody who's going to take the lead, somebody who's going to push forward these critical infrastructure items at this moment in time, and not somebody who's just there to play politics. So this is the time, and Phil's the guy.
Okay. Since Denver's mayor's race is getting a lot of attention in the last couple of weeks, you've had more people join. And actually, if you're thinking about joining the Denver mayor's race, you have until next week to do so. Luigi, how many are there now, people running for mayor?
I believe there are 26 right now.
26.
I'm waiting for it to get to 30. And I'm like, when we get to 30, I think we're gonna, but who knows? People still have a week to go, and I'm just figuring this one out. It's really easy to run for, or at least to put your name as a candidate for mayor of Denver. Now, of course, I think when we see the marketplace do the work of vetting and filtering, I think we're going to see a drop-off in a number of candidates. Some of them will immediately become the front runners just by virtue of having more money, perhaps, having more support for certain places. There might be certain union support for certain candidates. All of these are going to play out. But it's fascinating because I learned that a Denver mayor typically lasts between 8 and 12 years. So this is like job security for whoever wins for 8 to 12 years.
And a lot of power in charge of this town, right?
And a lot of problems that they need to be solving.
You're right. You're right. There's a lot going on in our city. Patty, there have been new additions, including someone who we know from this table, and this seems to be a thing here at Colorado Inside Out.
Well, when people want to talk about the city, sometimes they actually want to get out and do things about the city too. So we had just last week, Kwame Spearman filed to get the fair election funds and announced that he's running for mayor. He is not the first who's been at this table who's run for mayor. Ian Tafoya Thomas is also running. He's been a panelist on this show too. And we've had others like Tom Tancredo was a panelist on the show before he ran for Congress. Penn Tate, who's a city council at-large candidate. And of course, when you are running for a city office, or national office, you really cannot be sitting at this table without some equal time issues coming up too. But I think the fact that we have such a big group of people running isn't because it's so easy. It's because there's that much discontent with how things are going in Denver, with how things have been under one mayor for 12 years. I think there's going to be enough discontent that no matter who becomes mayor, we might see term limits being put back on. The 2-term limit that Denver voted to opt out of earlier. I think people are tired of a mayor being there for 12 years.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that will happen? And I'm also curious, it seems like as long as I've lived here, we've always had a runoff. That seems to be the way.
Well, I was talking to Mayor Webb not too long ago, and he told me nobody likes you after 12 years, no matter where you're at. And so he would know better than anybody. But I think if you are looking at the history, Kyle, you're absolutely right. Colorado, Denver in particular, has a system where if you don't receive over 50% of the vote on your first ballot, if no candidate does, then it goes to a runoff between two candidates. And it's the top two vote getters who appear on that second ballot. We've had that at least as far back as Pena Tully when they both unseated McNichols. We had Webb Early, we had Hickenlooper Mares, and of course Hancock and Romer. So it's every 12 years or so, we are in the same situation where we have lots of people who are running. There's certainly dozens more this particular time, but folks don't just get one bite at the apple, they get two. And so that's something that I think voters look forward to, although I will note for voters, this election's happening earlier. Typically, the first election happens in May. We're bumping up another 30 days. So people need to be focused on this race and appreciate all that you're doing to bring light to this race.
Why is that? Why is it early? Do you guys know?
Yeah, we had a ballot
Get it in line,
initiative.
right.
Yeah.
Did
Get
I
it
vote
in
on
line
that?
with state and federal rules, yeah.
Did I vote on that?
You did.
I did. Okay, sorry, I forgot. So election day is April the 4th. Ballots go out in March. Jessie, we've talked about on the show too, and Patty was just mentioning we need someone to jumpstart how things are. This is a very important city for our state. What do you think? What kind of person do you think voters will lean towards?
I think it's probably anyone's guess at this point. I've been getting a lot of polls. I'm a Denver resident, and I get maybe a text message every week, because some candidates out there trying to figure out exactly what Denver voters want. And I think it'll be interesting to see, who kind of rises to the top. I will say I've covered, I focus mostly on state politics and federal politics. So I've covered races where there's a bunch of candidates in the contest, and it's kind of anyone's guess when you get to 21, 26, 27 people who's going to come out on top. I cover the legislature, so I'm interested in the three folks in the legislature who are running for mayor. It's getting a little awkward in the Capitol because of that, and we'll see also how that, those Denver mayoral politics that everyone's focusing on, how that shifts into the Capitol and what kind of debates and legislation happen because of that. It's already happening in effect.
It already is in the first week. Interesting. All right. Now let's kick off our lightning round where our panelists will talk about the good and the bad that's transpired this week, the positive, the hopeful, the not so great. Patty, you can start with the not so great.
Well, let's go back to '83 when McNichols didn't even make the runoff. And one of the reasons was because the roads were so bad after the Christmas blizzard. Well, and that was in the days when you could go for 4 terms, which he was. If Hancock were going for 4 terms right now, he would not be getting it from the Denver voters who have been driving through the ruts and ice on the roads.
They are so bad right now. So bad. Scott.
You mentioned it earlier, Patty. Lauren Boebert at the U.S. Capitol making a mockery of this democratic process. I would want somebody who doesn't want to be a reality TV star and would rather have somebody who's there to represent the will of the people. It was embarrassing to watch her act the way that she did at the Capitol this week.
Mm-hmm. Jessie.
Patty mentioned on Monday there was a little bit of a dust-up in the House Speaker's race, but what I found most interesting and maybe most disconcerting as someone who's stuck in the Capitol for 120 days was how the House Republican caucus couldn't get on the same page. If they can't get on the same page, that means they can't work with Democrats, and that's going to create a lot of problems this year at the Capitol.
Okay.
Water, water, water. We've had more snow. And in some parts of the state, that's a really good thing. Some parts of our state are still pretty dry, but the snow is a very good thing. A snowpack helps not just Colorado, but the states in the Southwest that are reliant on the Colorado River. So very grateful that we're having snow.
Okay. Since you guys are so animated, our producer's saying, let's go another round. What other things made you not so happy this week? Can you think of something else? I mean, there was a lot going on this week.
I would say the rollout of the trash system in Denver is another thing that's going to affect the mayor's race. Not so smooth.
Patty, let me ask you, did they pick up your trash on time this time?
No, we have trash cans out in front of our street. I think it's so icy no one can make it down is part of the problem.
I was kind of hoping that they'd actually pick up on the day they said they were going to pick this one up, and no.
Nope.
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 Yeah, I would go back to the airline issues with Southwest Airlines canceling all the flights. This is a time for our Attorney General to look into his role as a consumer advocate and talk about whether the state needs to take action against somebody who's really scammed a whole bunch of flyers.
And then we talked earlier about Representative Tracy Burnett resigning on the first day of the legislature. She was charged back in November, waited till 10 p.m. on the night before the legislative session to announce her resignation. Woke me up. I got woken up out of my sleep, so that was annoying, but also just created this crazy mess in the legislature because of it.
Oh, it's the new year and it's a new start, and they get the chance, a second chance maybe, to do something else that you haven't done before. So I'm just excited for that.
Okay, let's talk about the good stuff that happened this week. There was good.
There was good. I'm going to talk about the loss of two good people, though.
Oh, yes.
At the very end of 2022, we lost Joyce Meskis, who not only created an unbelievable institution with the tattered cover. She bought it. It had been open for almost 3 years. She turned it into it had a national reputation. But the other thing Joyce did was fight for the First Amendment. People don't know just how far she was willing to defend people's rights to read and rights to privacy. Really a remarkable woman. And we just also lost Mary Chandler, who was the voice for art and architecture in this town for a long time, helped make this town look better. So we'll miss them both.
Well, you opened the show talking about how Denver was bustling this week because of the legislature. The other reason that the city is bustling is because the stock show is here. And for somebody who cares about the entire state like I do, the stock show is just a chance to show off what we can do, not just regionally, but nationally, and it's something that we should really be proud of.
It is. It's a great place.
Yeah, one new building opened up on the campus, and then they broke ground on
Right.
a second building. So
Lots going on.
it really is something just that's a gem for the city.
I have to say the start of the legislature again. I'm stuck in the Capitol for 120 days, so syllabus week, as I like to call it, is very nice for me where we don't get much done. Everybody likes each other. It's the time before the fangs come out all year, so I'm happy. It was a good, fun week.
We're going to check in on you in every 25 days and see how it's going, okay?
Make sure I'm still kicking.
You're either going to have fun or you're going to have too much fun.
Yeah, there you go.
I would say the stock show, I think this is we broke all of the attendance record for this stock show, and I'm just glad to see that people are in fact coming out again and going into places and going to events. That creates so much economic activity for the state, for Denver especially, and it's just a good thing.
It's a great thing. Thanks, everybody. It's been a busy week for you all, so I appreciate you coming in for the show. We went through a lot, so you can always go back and catch this show once again on pbs12.org and share it with a friend. Let them know what's going on in Colorado. Also, we appreciate your feedback on our social media pages and at CIO@pbs12.org. We listen to your thoughts and your ideas, and we talk about them as a group, and we want to hear from you as we enter the 31st year of Colorado Inside Out. Thank you for watching. We appreciate it. I'm Kyle Dyer. I'll see you next week here on PBS 12.